Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Battle Styles, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are talking about my favourite subject, Cube. I'm actually going to be talking about my all basics, no bricks cube. The idea around the cube is that every Pokemon can instantly be put into play, no matter what they are. If they're a level X, a stage 2, doesn't matter. You can just drop that guy down, start doing what you want with it. And yeah, there's also a huge weighting towards tutor-style supporter effects in particular, rather than good old-fashioned dump and draw, cross your fingers that you hit your combo pieces. Because I feel that is a pretty bad experience because it's really hit or miss, and I would much prefer a methodical game plan where everyone is getting into the game, doing what they want, imposing their strategies onto people, making their skill show, making their draft, and their decision making as they've gone through the draft really culminate into a deck where they're, going through their game plans. They've got a steady chain of supporters, a steady chain of energy. They have so much tutoring to cherry pick the Pokemon that they've drafted that it creates an experience where it's more about the gameplay itself rather than just like, I missed off of X supporter or my opening hand was so bad that I couldn't do anything. So yeah, let's jump into my motivation around this cube, because this is by no means the only cube I'm going to be having. I have many, like 8-player cubes, both online and in real life. This, however, is going to be my secondary IRL cube, and the idea is that it's going to be physically quite a compact cube. I'm hoping that I can get the cube, even with all the energies and stuff, into one ETB, because then it becomes very practical for me to simply shove into my backpack so that when we are hopefully going back to tournaments, especially traveling abroad, it's going to be much easier for me to bring this cube out to tournaments. And I'm hoping that the size of the cube as well, being a 4-player cube, means that it's easy for me to just grab people around me. We can sit down at a table, shuffle it all up, and get rolling with the cube. So in terms of practicality, I'm probably going to be playing this cube quite a lot because, it doesn't take as much time. It's normally about an hour draft if everyone is reading the cards slowly and like getting to grips with it, because it's a 264 card cube. And then, round robin, you can be done within like 3 or 4 hours. And that's actually like perfect timing, really, when you're thinking about like day 2 of a tournament, or if you're just going somewhere. Obviously, it's something that we casters do in the background when we're not able to play the tournaments. We will cube in the evenings to fulfill our urge to play Pokemon. So I do love bringing cubes to places, and especially when I am going abroad, I do love it. And it's one of those things where I want to have it accessible to me and fast enough that we can actually complete a cube rather than like get a draft done in 2 hours and then like come back to it the next day. It's not very easy to do. So this is literally going to be physically practical for me, and it means I'm going to get a lot of games in with this cube, I think. Another real motivation around this is that there's not going to be much donking going on. When everything's a basic with relatively high hit points, and the attack costs of most of these Pokemon doing like meaningful damage is like 3 and 4 energy attack costs, which gives both players a couple turns to set up Pokemon into play. And because things have between like 90 and 140 hit points, they stay in play for a few turns. Even if your opponent's hitting you first or whatever, they're initiating like a 60 damage prize trade, basically. So you don't just sit there with a goofy basic, flip for hypnosis, get tails and die, which can happen in some cubes, no matter how consistent things get. And even with, like implementation of gentleman mulligans and stuff like that, some people just get wacky hands. And let's face it, when you're playing evolution decks, that just happens much more often because your deck is super duper combo reliant, right? You have to think of every evolution as a combo card, essentially, because they're not valid, they're not usable until you find steps before. So if your opening hand is bad, things snowball out of control for the opponent, especially if they have a strong start and the other player doesn't, it snowballs rapidly. And here, when everyone is a basic with relatively similar hit points, there will be some slightly tankier Pokemon, there will be some slightly higher damage output Pokemon. Obviously, there is a balancing act there. But the range of hit points is just much more narrow. It's between about 50 hit points is the difference between the top end and the bottom end, compared to like a 30 hit point Feebas and like a 150 hit point like stage 2 Pokemon that can come in, right? So it just means that everyone is on a more even keel. They're not going to get one banged in like 2 turns, everyone will be in the game. So that's really the motivation around the gameplay aspect. Also, one thing I love about playing basic decks in standard as well as in this cube is that you're actually able to play some situational cards without the massive drawback. One thing that's really interesting, as I've drafted many cubes now over the years, essentially, is that there is, when you're playing evolution cubes, there is a huge incentive for you to not take sort of win more situationally strong cards, because essentially you just want to really iron out an approach where you have your attackers, you have your consistency, you make your best attacker work the most amount of times possible as quickly as possible, and that is a winning strategy, just like standard, right? But here, in a draft where everything's basics, you have the space to play situational cards, and when you have tutoring, you can get them at the times they're situationally powerful. So that's really the motivation around this, and it does draw on, you know, other eras of Pokemon where we have had great tutor support, and they've been the way that we've played games. Think about like Cyrus's Conspiracy in the SP era, a fantastic tutor supporter that keeps your chain of support going, keeps your chain of energies going, and you're cherry picking certain item cards. You know, it was a toolbox, obviously, the SPs, but that playstyle is what I was trying to recreate in this exact cube overall for everyone to get involved with. And obviously, as well, when all of the Pokemon essentially can just be plonked into play and are useful, they all have relevant text, relevant attacks, relevant abilities, Pokepowers, bodies. They can all be useful for you. It means that there's just way less dead weight. You aren't just going to sit there on like your last 3-4 picks of each pack being like, this will never help me, it's not going to work. Now obviously there's going to be some times where that's still, you know, going to be the case. You get a stadium that's not helpful, you get a Pokemon that's not going to be using, you're not going to be using those energy attachments or whatever for the most part, but it's just going to be way less than traditional evolution and even mutant evolution, because you can justify making one space in your deck for a card if it's going to be beneficial for you, or if you see how your deck ends up molding, you may want some extra type coverage in there. You might actually end up needing an ability that you didn't think you were going to use. So even like the dregs of packs can end up being valuable to you, and players are only drafting 66 cards. So that means like on average, when you're building a 60 card deck, you probably want to have like around 12 to 15 energies. So really you're thinking about 70% of the cards that you draft here are going to end up in your actual deck. So that tells you that's like a really high ratio compared to many other cubes. And we get away with that because every Pokemon's in the basic and they can just pad out your deck. Even though they're, you know, sometimes situationally helpful, they will still be helpful at some point. So yeah. Let's have a look at the rules then. The rules are going to be turn 1 Sword and Shield standard, which is they can't attack turn 1 and they can't play a supporter. I'm hoping this means that it outweighs the advantage of getting an early game attachment. Attack costs are quite expensive and Pokemon can get 2-shot. So the player going first does have that small advantage, but I'm trying to make things fairly even with the amount of Pokemon tutoring specifically and the fact that there is some Pokemon energy acceleration. The player 2 can catch up quite a bit just by having those cards in their deck. So it doesn't, it's not exclusively best to go first because the player going second has much more likelihood of getting an energy drop on their ideal attacker, and they have better search for, because they have their supporters, better search for their sort of engine pieces to really get that developed as well. So I'm hoping these turn 1 rules make the most sense for right now. I may also think about some sort of your opponent, or like player 1 can't draw for turn, something like that, an extra rule on top to really make things as balanced as possible, because I do feel like the energy drop thing is actually a slight advantage to player 1 right now. Let me know what you guys think about the turn 1 rules. It's actually a huge deal, especially in Cube. So yeah. Every Pokemon essentially can be like a basic and an evolution, so just essentially ignore the text of basic and evolved. There's going to be things like Master Royal, which can only attach to stage 2 grass type Pokemon, for example. Well, fire, water, grass. But that can go basically onto every fire, water, or grass Pokemon. There are tools in the cube that only can be attached to evolved Pokemon, attached to any of the Pokemon. If there's something that states, search your deck for these basics, it gets you any Pokemon as well. So just think of all these sorts of... the evolution text is essentially like irrelevant at this point. EX Pokemon only provide 1 prize, just the way the cube is power scaled. And lowercase ex and uppercase ex are treated as the same thing. I think this only specifically references one card in the cube, which is Eviltal, the Fright Knight Eviltal, which can snipe 60 to a benched capital EX Pokemon. And there are actually no capital EX Pokemon in the draft. There's only lowercase EX Pokemon, but I would prefer that Eviltal to be doing that 60 damage snipe and punishing people for having EXs in their deck in some form. So a very small thing there, but I did have to talk about it. A bigger change is that Pokemon that have when you play this Pokemon to evolve effects, that is instead treated as when you play this Pokemon from your hand to the bench. So essentially, they're coming into play effects just like you would see a Shaman, a Crobat, a Tapu Lele, those sorts of things. So ignore the when you play this Pokemon to evolve text, turn it into when you put it into play text. So a one-time use deal, but you do get the activation of that effect. And also level X Pokemon, most of them because they level X'd into the active position, right? You then also treat it as when you play this Pokemon from your hand to the bench, so they still can get their ability activation as well. Abilities are split into powers and bodies, active and passive. So, for example, there's Dialga G level X in here, which shuts off Poké bodies. So anything with a passive ability would also get shut off by that Dialga G level X, something to, again, think about. And, it means that Poké powers are still safe to roam, and abilities that are active are also able to be used. I've made an active approach to have a ton of colorless energy attackers in the draft. Not only colorless Pokemon, but colored Pokemon that have like 1 grass plus 2 colorless, 1 fire plus 2 colorless, those sorts of attacks, so that it encourages multiple types synergizing with each other and having cross synergies across sort of all archetypes. So it's not going to be you go straight into Psychic or someone goes straight into Lightning. Now, of course, you will have some inter-type synergy as well, of course, and you want to try and have some fluidity with your energy attack cost, so there will be natural ebb and flow there in terms of how weighted your deck is towards certain types, but there's also a ton of cross synergy. So most of the time we do these drafts, people are a split of like 2 to 3 types. That's just how things go, because the way that you see the cards as you get them in the packs, you're gonna get pulled in different directions. There's reasons to cherry pick from all sorts of different types and have that different coverage, really. So I've made an active effort to have lots of special energy, which could be providing multiple energy, as well as having lots of colorless attack costs, so you can weave these attacks in when they are useful, and Pokemon aren't just sat on the bench just being like, I am here because I'm an ability. I want everything to be able to attack if need be. Just a quick one, the burn rules are the old burn rules. That means if you flip heads, you are still burnt, you just take no damage. Whereas if you flip tails, you take 2 damage counters. Whereas current rules is you take the 2, then you flip the coin, right? And if you hit heads, you're no longer burned. So old burn rules means it's not guaranteed damage. That only references a couple of Pokemon in here, but it means it's not guaranteed, plus 2 damage or whatever, or plus 3 damage, because I think there's a Magmortar level X in here as well. So yeah, and finally, weakness is treated as plus 20 for all Pokemon, rather than having some, scattered times 2, some plus 20s here, just based on the different eras of Pokemon. I think a blanket 20 makes much more sense here, because I don't want the cube experience to be, haha, my fighting deck beat your lightning deck. I want it to have, again, multiple types within decks anyways, which really covers that for the most part. I do want there to be some advantage given to players who are, playing multiple types and being able to capitalize on things. Resistance is still going to be kept as is. So resistance can be as important as weakness, and trying to maneuver that in your game is going to be fun and a good challenge, but not so backbreaking that you can't beat the water deck as the fire player. I want there to be options for all types of decks. And just a reminder in the bottom corner, 264 card cube. Each player will be drafting 66 cards, and that's going to be 6 packs of 11. That means you see your initial pack 3 times, and you have a good idea of what is being drafted the whole time, a good amount of information there for you. I think that 11 card pack for 4 players means the process does, cycle quite quickly. You get a good feeling of what else is being picked and what direction you think you can go in. So information-wise, I think these are good pack sizes. Does make for a fast draft as well. Like I said, probably under an hour for the most part, especially Sort of in my friend group now, we're all familiar with a lot of what the cards do. We're not having to reread 3 times over just to make sure that we're not missing out on an interesting card. We've basically seen a lot of these by now. So we can probably get our draft in like under 40 minutes at this point, and possibly even faster in IRL compared to Google Sheets, but that's yet to be seen because unfortunately I haven't been able to play this IRL just yet, but pretty soon I'm hoping. So yeah, the ratios are quite different from standard cube ratios. 34.5% Pokemon is very, very low ratios, actually. Typical cubes sit more to around the sort of 50 to 60% mark, but that is, of course, because we have so much less dead weight here. Every Pokemon you can just pick, and if you think you want to play the card, it goes straight in. There's no qualms or worries about, like, do I hit the basic? Do I hit the stage 1 later down the line? Do I have to cherry pick these over, like, powerful supporters? No. You just take the card, you know that then it can immediately go into your deck. That's the same for supporter picks, item picks, tool picks, stadium picks. As soon as you see the card, you think, that will work in my deck, I want to use it, you grab it, it's yours. There's no worries about that at all. And it means, again, you can be very sort of strict on the amount of cards that each player drafts, because even if things are going to pot and you're a completely new drafter, you'll have naturally still got a good chunk of Pokemon to use. So everyone, even if you have like a weak deck, you still have a viable deck, right? Because you have, you know, like 15 Pokemon that you can play, you have a good amount of supporters that get passed around. So even, you know, someone completely new to Cube, this is actually quite beginner friendly. I don't think you'll go ahead and win the Cube straight away necessarily because, you know, the drafting process is something that takes experience, but you'll at least have something that functions and is coherent and works, just because the you have to think about all these numbers on this side divided up by 4 players, and that means that everyone has a generous amount of supporters, a generous amount of Pokemon to use. The stadiums, you know, that gives you a ton of variety there, in terms of if you want to play any at all. If you do want to play some, you can play a few. Again, yeah, there's just a good amount for you to naturally see that they'll enter your deck at different points. So yeah, I really like this split. The special energy count is actually on the very, very high side compared to most cubes as well, percentage-wise. But that is because my emphasis is having a ton of special energies which allow multiple Pokemon to use different energy colors so that they can be splashed into decks. So yeah, that's really the emphasis of the cube. So let's jump over to my Google draft now and talk about some of the cards in more depth and what I like and dislike and things that I'm trying to balance. So the All Gas No Bricks Cube version 2 is going to be in the description below. It essentially has the long list of all the cards here. The only thing to note about the drafter is that I am using a Team Rocket's Harassment card, which was actually never printed in English. This was a Japanese promo, which forces each player to shuffle their hand into their deck and draw 5 cards. That's actually not in the drafter. This was never actually printed in English. This is just something that one of my friends has done for me. So there is going to be a Here Comes Team Rocket card, actually 3 copies of this card because it's not a singleton draft, by the way. And if ever you see that card come up in the drafter, this card here, you're actually drafting each player shuffles and draws 5 instead. So just a small thing to bear in mind. We normally play on untap, so this exact card, the Team Rocket's Harassment, is on untap, so you can find this card. Just remember that we're not actually drafting the Here Comes Team Rocket thing at all. Oh, one other thing actually is that I also play with prize cards face up. Well, not actually face up, but you're able to look at your prize cards and take the prize cards in the order that you want as well. So it's like you've town mapped, but your opponent doesn't have that information. So it's more similar to actually if you played Azelf back in the day and you time walked, that's actually more similar to what it's like, because I always find that when you play really important one-ofs, the Pokemon are all one-ofs, it's just the trainers which aren't, that it can feel really bad if your strategy is more heavily weighted towards 1 or 2 key Pokemon that you lose just because it was your 5th or 6th prize and you just like couldn't win anyway. And in Cube, you know, even if you have ample amount of effects that can interact with the prize cards, like Azelf, like Rotoms, like whatchamacalls them, Gladians, Island Hermits, those sorts of cards. There are tons of them. I don't want to jam-pack the cube with a ton of those sorts of effects because they're kind of weaker effects. You don't want them to be into play in the first place. The Azelf and the Rotom specifically have much lower hit points than the rest of the cube, so it would just not fit very well. So yeah, instead we're saving ourselves prize checking again for faster gameplay, right? And it gives again another layer of depth to decision making because you can take risks board state wise, knowing that if you take prizes in a certain way at the right time, that can change how you play the game later on. And even like you can use your prizes as resources now that you can mine at the right time, essentially, rather than just like lucky dip, play towards an out and then miss that out and feel really bad about it. So yeah, let's have a look at some of the types. Like I said, things are really around that 90 on the low end, 140 on the very high end of hit points. Not many Pokemon have that higher hit points. Just a few Pokemon out here like Steelix, like Venusaur. A couple of them are some of the chunkier Pokemon in the draft. I'm looking for 100 damage at the very high end is what we're looking at here. That's kind of things like Charizard, which has a 4 energy attack cost and has to discard 2. Steelix is a 5 energy attack cost for that sort of damage. A 4 energy attack cost for 100 on Nidoking, and that's flipping coins, so you could whiff as well. And then the sort of low end of the spectrum, like the early game damage, is like Steelix that can do up to 60. There's some like 1 attachment for 30 kind of pokes going in here as well, like Flash and stuff like that. And then your sort of middle ground is like 60 with upside effects. So you can have some status being thrown in, some healing being thrown in, moving energy back, being able to access cards from your discard pile. That's the sort of thing that I'm looking for here. So the range really is, the very high end is 100 damage. The sort of main thing you're looking for is sort of that 2-shot range of around 60 to 70 damage. And there are just some little aggressive pokes that you can have in here as well. So there's not really coherent themes between each type. Like I said, I want things to be more fluid. I want you to be able to play Psychic Pokemon with Lightning Pokemon, with Water Pokemon, like all in one deck, and it to still be coherent. So do just bear that in mind. But as I go through the types, we'll just see that like Venusaur is obviously a good search tool for you. Status conditions are certainly a thing to bear in mind. Virizion more of like an early game sort of beat stick. If Leaf Wallop is unchecked for a couple turns, that can be really high tempo and it gives you good draw power. Abomasnow on the high hit points higher end of hit points can be acceleration. And it has 80 with upside damage. Tropius again, early aggression. Vivillon is one of the best energy accelerators in the whole cube, just because it's coin flip based, but it can be any color of energy. Beautifly walls EX Pokemon, so again, that's walling a small number of EXs in the draft, and again, 80 with upside damage output. Victory Bell can do more status things and does 60 heal. So if there is any theme in Grass, it would be a minor healing theme and status theme, because there's Victory Bell, Vileplume, and Venusaur. So there is a few things status-wise there. Fire is kind of more higher damage output, but it has painful discards. So you got your Charizard that can do 100. Camerupt is great acceleration for fire and for fighting. Magmortar can do little bits of spread. This is the biggest sniper available. 100 damage snipe is quite dangerous. Obviously, there are many things that can still stay out of range safely on the bench, but there are a number of support Pokemon which sit below that mark. Moltres can steal some energies. Volcarona does some hit and run. Oh, sorry, not hit and run. It pushes things to the back, and just a vanilla 2 for 60 is solid. Typhlosion is energy acceleration. Latios self-accelerates, and Latias self-accelerates. And Tyranitar. There are 2 crush draw effects in the cube. Both of them are quite powerful acceleration. They remove the top card of your deck. If it's an energy, you get to attach it into play. If it's not, you just put it back on top of your deck. And there are some deck manipulation strategies. There's Oranguru, and there's also a good amount of Oracle and Mallow effects as well. So you can have ways to sort of stack your top deck to guarantee those energies, but not like hugely reusable outside of Oranguru being like the main combo piece for Crush Draw. Not going to go over all of these. I'm realizing it would take a really long time. But for water, some of the standout things, Hydro Pump can do really high damage output. Milotic just generically strong. Slush Rush. Hit and Run is actually quite solid. There's this card and there is Curse Guard down here. Both with hit and run strategies. Doesn't sound that insane, but there are some good synergies with just throwing things into the active. Or if you can, just end up having a ton of damaged Pokemon in play, because there's limited amounts of gusting, you can essentially waste turns from the opponent just hitting them and keeping your energies in the back. Here's your other Crush Draw. Walrein is just very solid, played back in the day. Vanillux has Escape Rope inbuilt and is one of the higher beat sticks, especially into high retreat cost Pokemon. There's also a Water Abomasnow. And Waterlog Blastoise is balanced energy acceleration because it forces a end of turn effect. There's actually a very similar approach with energy recycle from Electivire. So Blastoise is from the hand, Electivire is from the discard pile. We've got Luxray, which can do up to 100. Actually, one of the bigger lightning beat sticks. Pulse Barrier is a really annoying effect, as is Shocking Tail. So this is a pretty annoying card to sort of deal with. Electivire FB is actually on the sort of... It's on the edge of... It's certainly one of the stronger cards if you build around this. So it's on the sort of suspect list right now where I don't think it's strong enough to take out. I have had a number of Pokemon which I have taken out for being too strong. A handful as well that I have like since upgraded because they weren't weak enough. So I really have got it down to a fine science where I'm pretty happy with almost every card in here right now, power level wise. But Electivire is kind of one of those high priority picks if you can build into him. Ironically, with the card just beneath it, Sprint can easily get you a lot of energies in the discard pile early. You can end your turn energy recycling, and then that can be one of the more powerful accelerators in the game. And if you have a ton of energy acceleration in general, Powerful Spark can just be big burst damage. So something to bear in mind. Zeb Strike is an interesting one. You have to really build towards that sprint, but it is good draw. And 2 for 60 again, pretty solid. Rayquaza's good sniping and good aggression as well, especially if you're behind. Zapdos steals energy. Electivire is a self-accelerator, but he does flip coins. Ampharos has a really annoying Pokebody, jamming, which basically punishes people using supporters each turn. Puts a damage counter on all the opponent's Pokemon. It's actually quite a big damage mod, and again, one of the stronger cards. It's actually interesting that many decks function without any use of supporter whatsoever, because there are so many like draw 1, draw 2, look at the top 2 kind of effects. And because everything's a basic, you spend a lot of cards in the opening turns getting set up, but in the mid game, you only really need to like figure out where you're attaching to and play like 1 or 2 item cards, and supporters are sort of cream on top. So you actually, there does become a point where jamming just is wasted space on the board. That said, Ampharos still has a good damage attack as well, so on the higher end for sure. Metagross is good deck control. Uxie, good deck control as well, and 2 for 60 is not bad. It's on the lower end of hit points. We all know what the Skiratina's up to. Typhlosion moves damage counters. Mashana's draw. Gothitelle can help you win Stadium War. Gallade, again, just solid spread and damage output. Crobat draw. Kurskar, a really good hit and run Pokemon, again with some damage manip. Mewtwo, kind of beefy Pokemon, but also lets you reuse some broken supporters. Nidoqueen can be early tempo, early draw, but can also be good at making comeback plays. Machoke can give you some protection against bench damage. There are a couple of things. I think bench damage is really strong in the cube in general, so I do want to have some... I want to have healing effects, and I want to have some defense against just sniping approaches, because I've actually been very conservative on sniping in general, because it has been stronger in the cube before, and it has felt quite oppressive. So you really have to be careful with that. When Gust is not that strong, sniping just becomes super duper premium, right? So you have to keep that in line. And there's also a ton of like passive damage effects with things like that jamming Ampharos and also Dark Tyranitar. So having Machoke means that people can't just go one-dimensional into that deck and say that like this ability wins me the game instantly, because a Machoke is going to be in someone's deck that can just deny that, and it gets reasonable value in a lot of matchups anyway, so it's something to bear in mind. Meganium can actually be quite tanky. People have built entire decks around this Delta reduction attack, but also it just gets a ton of Pokemon into play. Nidoking is also very strong. It has like inbuilt Rocky Helmet, which is really good. Swampert can draw you cards. Hippowdon, fast, aggressive damage, same as Passimian. Espadrille is actually really nice for some recovery. Machamp helps you stack your deck for crush draw and just drawing in general. Hippowdon level X, scary card to come up against, because that Sandry set can be hugely impactful, with also some sniping inbuilt. So a pretty strong card against situational, got to build around it, but can be cool. Hippowdon, just generally good stats, just a vanilla 4 for 90 with no resist and a 70 that moves an energy back is quite efficient. I'm going to go through... I'm ending up talking about all these cards. Yeah, Darkness Wing, good recovery, Feint Attack, doing some stuff. Muck adds some disruption. Very few disruption cards in the cube itself. I want to have as few feels bad cards as possible. But this is actually a really powerful card. ATM Poison with no drawback is really good. Houndoom is essentially 2 heads flips to do 20 damage. But people do stay burned as well, so you are also forcing switch outs for them, so it can be a nice passive damage mod. Garbodor as well, pretty strong. Vanilla 80, and you can poison things if you have a stadium in play. So again, passive damage that can come in here. Dark Tyranitar, very, very strong card. This is also on the questionable list of cards because it is quite powerful, and almost every time I haven't seen Dark Tyranitar not be played in a deck yet. I think it's one of those cards that just is drafted quite high priority wise, but then also ends up being in every person's deck who does, like, everyone ends up using this card at some point. There's a few good hit and run synergies. Second Strike is just a good inherent attack, so it's one of the most powerful cards in the cube for sure, Pokemon wise. Absol can manipulate damage, Yveltal can do that 60-60, and also has Tool Disruption, so again on that more disruptive side. Greninja has a hard to use ability, but a really powerful one if it comes off, and 60 for 2 with the 20 snipe is also just very efficient. Shiftry also disruptive, so the dark stuff is sort of disruption based for the most part. Dialga can turn off a ton of bodies, so similar to Machoke, I wanted to have a check to a lot of these passive damage things, like jamming, and like that Dark Tyranitar. So there's a few ways that you can try and deny those sorts of effects from people, which is pretty good. In general, this is a sort of good late game sort of card with more disruption involved. Steelix is a surprisingly strong beat stick, as is the Prime, with more tank ability. Sizzle can really punish special energy, which there are tons of, so very efficient card. Miracle Oracle has a ton of synergy with energy recursion approaches, like Motor Drive and like Burning Draft, and just his draw in general. Napoleon disrupts energy and is pretty decent. Nidoqueen is just like the Venusaur with good search ability, and it has its own decent attack. The Bastiodons both are trying to do tanking in different ways. This is another way you can protect your bench Pokemon from passive damage and sniping in general. And Anger Revenge is actually a really, really strong attack. You do 60 and 40 to a benched Pokemon if you took a hit, which when there's limited amounts of Gust, you will take a hit with Bastiodon quite a lot. So a 60-40 is actually really, really strong in this cube. I haven't seen many people actually build around this Bastiodon. I think it's still underrated within my friend group, but I always pick it. I haven't used it a huge amount, but I do really like that card. Right. And then the color stuff is intended to be more support-based in general. Slurpuff is drawing you cards. Both Dragonites are for movements. Porygon Z disrupts special energies and is actually just disrupting energy in general. Blissey, just a decent attacker, as is Barbarrel, surprisingly. Drawing cards, sniping from Garchomp. More potential draw from Snorlax. It can be a build around if you want to heal him up with exercise. Blissey is some nice healing. Oranguru is just really solid with Crush Draw and just not bad in general. Skarmory, good search, good pressure in the early turns. Metronome can punish big damage attacks. Aerodactyl is disruption for tools. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. And again, adds a 1 energy attachment. Confusion is a panic button win condition in some decks. Greedent can search out tools, which is nice, and a vanilla 80 for 3 is actually very solid. Noctowl's Draw and Soft Boiled Heals. You may notice that there's 1 additional Psychic and 1 additional Fighting Pokemon here, so it's not like every single Pokemon is the exact same in terms of balance, and obviously there's a ton more colorless. But I think I'm really happy with the ratio that I'm at right now, Pokemon-wise, and I think I wanted to give some of these types, potentially a small push, because there are things like Machoke, which you never actually attack with as a fighting type. There are things like Uxie, which you can attack with, but it's all a colorless attack cost. So, I feel like attacking-wise, I think I've balanced quite well the type coverages, and in general, most things match. Let's talk about some of the supporters then. So, like I said, I have a huge emphasis on tutoring. So you'll see that I'm playing multiple copies of a ton of supporters that I think are really important. A good amount of hand disruption cards, so the opponent is making plans, but you can stop them making those plans. But there's also just in general a good chain of supporters going on. Castaway helps you find your next supporter whilst giving you an energy attachment, whilst getting you tools out of the deck, which are all like pretty helpful. Birdkeeper gives you a ton of switch outs. I've got Lynette's Net Search and Oak Setup as some of the most often seen search cards, and they are all getting 3 different types of Pokemon, which means that you are more tempted to build multiple color Pokemon decks, right? Because these are the best search options that you have, as well as a ton of Roseanne's. Roseanne's just a fantastic card for this cube. Like, it's well balanced, but it's just like such a nice card for what I'm trying to achieve, which is great tutoring. And this just means that you can play multiple types of energy, multiple types of Pokemon. Roseanne gets all of those for you. A couple of damage mods. Obviously, the Here Comes Team Rockets, like I said, they are force your opponent to shuffle in their hand and draw 5, and you do the same. There is a good amount of N and admin and Looker's investigation, so you can affect your opponent's hand. Just be careful with it, of course. Sinlin for reloading supporters. There is Lusamine in here as well. There aren't any really toxic supporters in here, so I'm not worried about a Lusamine loop or whatever. Very few games do end up going down to deck out. So I haven't seen deck out strategies be done. There have been some healing tanking strategies, and things do get sort of, the games can go quite long, but I've not yet seen a build of this cube that's trying to completely just stop your opponent from winning and run them out of cards. So at the moment I haven't got any specific erratas for these cards, but I know that's a common thing in cubes. Outside of that, yeah, more tutoring from Guzhala. Giovanni's Exile, as well as Swoop Teleporter, is a big theme in the deck. In the cube as well. Giovanni's Exile helping you get rid of situationally strong Pokemon. Things like early game, if we go back to... There's things like early game Meganiums, things like early game Venusaur even, potentially. Some of your draw pieces that get you going in the opening stages, you can then take them off the board or Swoop Teleport them into different Pokemon. So this is actually a really nice card to open up board space, because that's something that actually gets filled up really quickly, and you actually have to manage quite a lot. A ton of Mallow and Oracle for the draw 1 effects that are in the draft, so a ton of synergies there, some good comeback cards as well in general. A couple of Energy Accelerators, Bead and Mars Royal, as well as I've got some patches in here as well. So yeah, the Saucer, the Dart Patch, the Aqua Patch. There are 6 Swoop Teleporters, one of my favourite themes of the cube. This wasn't in my initial rendition, and I'm so happy that we tried this, because it makes for much better gameplay, I find. It means people can have sort of like surprise tech cards, which is fun to a certain extent, and because weakness is only plus 20, it's not like people can Swoop Teleporter and completely like rail you. And when you see something on the bench with 4 energies, you still got an idea that there's going to be a big attack coming, right? No matter what they're Swoop Teleporting into. So it's not like a complete surprise I got you moment, which I think is really good. But it also means, like I said, when cards start having diminishing returns, you can then just swoop them into a more usable Pokemon instead. So like things like Crush Draw can be really good for tempo in the early turns, or like Waterlog, those sorts of things. Or you can get like 1 use from Mind Report, 1 use from other effects like Emperor's Aura, Cursed Eyes, these sorts of things. You get their use and then you can swoop them later on. Whereas before we had the Swoop Teleporters, these effects were seeing not as much play. Just because you get the use, it's a big like tempo advantage, but then you end up missing out on a Pokemon that could be in play for the rest of the game. And essentially you're saying no to a draw 1 per turn, because there are so many draw 1 effects that sort of get passed around, that everyone has their chance at picking these up. And if you're saying no to a free card every turn, that's like a big disadvantage. So the Swoop Teleporters and the Exile really open the door for those sorts of situational abilities, which I think is really cool. There is a decent amount of small heals, like Moo Moo Milk, Potion, Big Malasada, and the Power Level and Freshwater Set, one of the most high priority heals actually in the draft. These are actually impactful math changes for where we're at with the draft right now. There are a couple of Power Hounds and a couple of Counter Catchers. This is the only Gust in the draft, as well as Double Gust actually down here. So from there, it's just like ropes and stuff. So the idea is that people going ahead have to be aware that there are combat mechanics available, which again makes for interesting gameplay. There's a ton of ball search for things. There's a ton of switch outs and some good recovery pieces as well. Have to bear in mind this is only split between 4 people, so like a stretcher, a maintenance, an ordinary, a regular rod, and a Lana's rod. It's only 5 things, but that's still, everyone has the chance pretty much to see one, right? It is the idea, and there's, ample amounts of other cards here, so everyone does get their selection of all sorts of things if they want them, if they prioritize them. For stadiums, I don't want hugely powerful stadiums. I think you have to be really careful with stadiums tools and special energy, really. I don't want anyone to have like a monster huge advantage. And when there's 10 in the draft, it means everyone has the chance to at least have a counter stadium with some upside for them. I've tried to have stadiums which will be contested between the types, so I haven't just gone for like Giant Hearth over here and Brooklet in another, so that there's like one type can take advantage of these or whatever. I want there to be competition for things. So that's why you can see like some multi-type style stadiums going on here outside of Aspertia, but everyone has the chance to draft colorless, right? So yeah. For tools, again, we're on the low side of power level in terms of the damage output. A free 20 damage on like a muscle band would be backbreaking. So having it in the form of solid rage, which is sort of when you're behind, you get to do the extra 20 damage, is much better. Energy root is gaining 20 hit points, but it removes an ability, or sorry, a poker power or body. So yeah, it does encompass all of them, right? So it works on some good vanilla Pokemon with no downside, but you have to be far more selective with it, or you have to like turn off your own bodies or powers. So there are some drawbacks to that. So yeah, on the low power level of tools for the most part, the mystery plates are also really cool cards in general. They're good early game attacks for you to get set up, but they can be great late game disruption pieces. These are almost as disruptive as like stamps in the late game. So don't be sleeping on these mystery plates. They're a lot of wall of text, but they're worth reading. And then finally, a couple Holand's Electrode and Magneton. These are just fantastic for when you're trying to play multicolored attacking decks, and they're so searchable with the amount of Pokemon search you have in the decks. That these are really high priority picks, I think. A ton of like blend and unit energies to try and get these going. A few energies for certain types to take advantage of, and a number of colorless energies in here as well. So yeah, that was a big spiel. I don't know how in depth you wanted me to go here, but I'm just really passionate about this cube. It's actually one of my favorite ways to. I mean, cube is already my favorite way to play Pokemon, but the way that I've tried to gear this exact cube has made some really fun gameplay, and I'm really proud of where the cube is right now and how it's got to this point. So I really do implore you guys to play this, and if you see me round in tournaments, I've probably got this in my backpack from now on. So yeah, I've got to buy the physical cards for a lot of these. I think I'm going to be starting off proxying it first. Boo me, because I already have an IRL cube. And a lot of these cards are quite old at this point, so it would be effort to try and get these. I have a ton of these anyway, just 'cause I've been collecting for so long. But there'll be a few gaps that I'm sure I will eventually have to go ahead and begrudgingly pick up. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this style of cube. Is it something that you think you'd be interested in? Do you think it's a nice start for you if you haven't cubed before? And if you haven't cubed before, why haven't you? Get cubing, for goodness sake. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I will see you tomorrow. Probably back to some standard stuff, but I just had to talk about Cube today, you know? Cheers.